Welcome to this Vital Health podcast. I'm Duane Schulthess, the CEO of Vital Transformation. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by two of my colleagues to discuss the current state of affairs and all the chaos in biopharma. I'm joined today by Gwen O'Loughlin, VT's research partner, and a data-driven diva. Hello, Gwen. How are you?
Hello.
Good to see you. And I'm also joined by Dr. Harry Bowen, VT's consulting economist and a professional purveyor of common sense. Good morning, Harry.
Greetings.
Harry, it's a little early. Sorry about that. So firstly, our most favored nation preprint is out. We have a preprint that is currently undergoing peer review, where we simulate what would happen if companies actually were forced to put an MFN price into the market. So Harry, can you tell us a little bit of an overview of what we did and what we found?
Sure. Yeah, so the basic idea was to ask that kind of counterfactual question, which is what would have happened, these drugs that have already been approved, looking back in time, and then saying what if they had faced MFN prices at the time when they were making decisions about whether to go forward and seek approval, et cetera, et cetera. When you run the net present value analysis, standard analysis, under the pricing as it was at the time and as if we were the biopharma financial people and deciding whether or not this was a viable project, I think about 10% of them had a positive net NPV, something around there.
Yeah, we saw it go about 80-90% negative.
Yeah. And well, it was positive under the pricing that existed at the time, before we did MFN.
Yeah, but right now, most of them, 80% are positive right now today. 10 of them aren't.
Right, that's right. And so then we got a sample of similar countries to the United States. As you know, the MFN legislation has you find a peer set of countries, which usually has to do with GDPs adjusted, so to speak, similar to the United States. And we calculated, based on their prices of this basket of countries, what would be the reduction in the U.S. price that would be necessary in order to match that MFN price. And then we ran that through the net present value analysis, and basically about 80% of them, if it would have been negative under NPV, then the conclusion is that it's unlikely that these drugs would have been brought to market at the time.
And it's interesting, too, because if you look at the cohort now, 7 of the cohort of 37 drugs we have don't make money now. So there's never a sure thing in this sector.
Right. Well, it's highly risky.
It is a highly risky sector, and you don't know until you put it in the market.
Right.
And MFN just adds a ton more uncertainty.
It gets detailed in terms of, well, how is this really going to be implemented in terms of what price they're picking. A lot of times when you do these analyses, as we did too, you're looking at an average price sometimes. So it gets very fuzzy as to what really becomes the benchmark.
Over half of all studies that we've been looking at for all the work we've been doing have been in cancer. What we're seeing is that cancer is overwhelmingly being targeted.
Specifically the small molecules.
The small molecules, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that gets to the Inflation Reduction Act, because we were on record very early saying that the CBO analysis was wrong. By using an elasticity at the median, they were missing the fact that there would be huge changes away from exposure to these pricing negotiations.
Right.
And this is what we saw with the Inflation Reduction Act, and now we're seeing it with these potential issues with MFN. If the numbers are that bad, I mean, 60, 70% pricing reductions. We've done several different methodologies, several different studies for a few different clients. If you had a price and that level of impact, I mean, that huge level of impact, if you're a company, you're going to do everything possible to try and avoid that, I would think.
You would think. It is rather devastating. It's like losing 3/4 of your market. You know, it brings up some recent stuff. I saw this the article that you forwarded by Steve Houston recently, and arguing that the drug companies individually have been slain and saying that they need to unite. And I think that's probably the right thing.
But it's been interesting, though, because they've exercised almost a prisoner's dilemma intentionally on the companies.
Yeah.
Because they've not allowed collective bargaining.
It's divide and conquer.
Yeah,
100%.
Exactly.
Now, Gwen, you used to manage a whole series of elderly age homes, things like that.
Yeah, home health.
Home health.
Nursing homes, assisted livings, yes.
One of the things that Harry and I were always fighting is this opinion that you could isolate the Medicare market from the commercial market. So you'd be able to put in a crazy low price in Medicare, but it wouldn't matter if you were dealing with, commercial insurance. From your experience, I mean, if you see a price that's that low in Medicare, do you think you're not going to get that also in the commercial market, or would you think that it would just pollute the whole market as a whole?
Actually, from an administrative standpoint, it is so much easier to take on just fee-for-service traditional Medicare, no matter what the price is, because you're just guaranteed payment.
Right.
I would say that insofar as commercial or Medicare Advantage, you're not guaranteed. And also, none of the systems are set up, all the portals, they're individual. So each one of the systems is already set up for traditional Medicare and the reimbursement. So it's much easier. There's less administrative overhead. Whatever it is, you're going to get the payment. You're not so sure for Medicare Advantage or commercial.
So, Harry, we've seen these prices bleed in. Gwen says it's easier. You're just going to take whatever you get. Why do you think there was this idea that you'd be able to isolate these markets?
It doesn't make sense if you just think about markets in general. Large organizations that would manage healthcare for not retirees, but not Medicare. There's no way that they're going to let Medicare get away with a very, very low price and their members are not getting something similar to that price. And that's been our logic all along. To me, it makes sense. If nothing else, you'll get a black market.
We're already seeing this too, by the way. We're seeing some of these prices drift in from IRA into some of the state insurance pools. I mean, we're already seeing it.
Well, and then they switch their formularies and the tiers, and if they're going to pre-approve it or not, I mean, you have to wait weeks sometimes before you get a prior auth.
Authorization.
I just went through that, actually. They approved it.
How long did that take?
We started around the first week of January. What was very strange in that, just as an aside, was when the request was made for this particular medication, they responded and said, well, we have this whole menu of all these other similar medications, and they're not cheap. I mean, they're comparable to what I was asking for.
Because they're getting a better internal deal.
Yes.
Well, yeah, perhaps. I don't know.
Gwen?
Yes.
Yes? Yeah. Okay. But really, I mean, it was almost all of them. So
Except the one you wanted.
yeah, but I won't say who it was.
Yeah, we don't want a lawsuit this morning.
Yeah, la, la, la.
So Gwen, when the IRA stuff was first announced, when these public prices first came out, and obviously we've published articles where we have certain questions about the dates they chose because it seemed to favor cardiovascular drugs as opposed to some of the more expensive oncology products, which we would have expected to see regardless. Leaving that aside, you had a really interesting reflection about the political motivations and some of the aspects of this in your own family. I'd be really interested to hear that story.
Well, when I heard about they're going to negotiate the drugs, and we didn't know which ones they were yet, I said right away they're going to do Eliquis, because so many people that are Medicare age and are voting are paying for the Eliquis because it's on patent. But although the patent was, I think, 2 years out, it really shouldn't have been, but I knew it was going to be added anyways. And sure enough, it was. And it did help with the voting.
We actually looked at the math on this about had they chosen cancer drugs versus the number of beneficiaries. And we saw that by going for the cardiovascular drugs, you had 3 times as many people who were impacted. It's highly likely through game theory on MFN, Harry, that no company in their right mind would take that price. We understand that. What happens next now? What do you think is going to happen from an economic standpoint? If you're a company and you're looking at this, what would you do?
One is I would be lobbying, right, to try to weaken it or eliminate it. From a strategic standpoint, some of these individual company agreements that have been signed are kind of lost leaders, right? So they say, okay, we'll give up this drug if you just kind of leave us alone on the other stuff. I'm not sure that is a strategy that's going to play out. The other thing is the other side of the coin, the European countries and others, the benchmark countries, the ones that you would be comparing to. And that is sort of how are the drug companies going to react with regard to those markets. Because in principle, if you just thought about it, you'd say, well, if they're going to use that country's price as a low price, then I'm just going to raise that price in that country, and now we eliminate that low price, so to speak, or I bring it up by 50% or something like that. But of course, they face then resistance from the country that negotiated with them. It may not do much under existing drugs, because of this threat of compulsory licensing. So you're kind of stuck. If you're in there, you may not be able to do much. But what it says is, I'm not sending any new drugs to these countries because I'm not even going to bother to negotiate because they're going to negotiate a very low price. And I'm not willing to accept that price. So I'm not even going to begin to do the negotiation in those countries.
One of our clients went to the UK and very publicly said, here's our new drug, here's our price, this is what we're offering to the UK, ta-da, it's the same price as we're offering in the United States. Maybe the strategy is going to be hold the line and not budge on that price anymore. They might just say, this is it, take it or leave it. But then that's where this compulsory licensing.
Right. That's why I wouldn't do that gamble per se. The minute you potentially introduce that drug into a different country and start that process of trying to get approval and negotiation for prices, then they're locked in and they're potentially in danger of the compulsory licensing. And I think you know more than I do about the issue here with the WTO. If I don't go in to start to negotiate a drug in a particular market, am I still on the hook in terms of compulsory licensing on a worldwide basis?
The regulation for the TRIPS waiver and the WTO regs are very specific that it has to relate to a medical emergency. Emergencies are, stub to toe, emergency, I mean, there's emergencies everywhere these days.
Right.
So the question becomes, what becomes an emergency? And how do you define one? If a U.S. company comes in with a cancer drug that they're not going to negotiate down on and says, this is our price, take it or leave it or lump it, I see no reason why a populist politician wouldn't say, we are going to compulsory license this. This is an emergency.
Yes, we saw that during COVID, didn't we?
We saw it during COVID, absolutely. Yeah. WTO folded, the USTR, U.S. Trade folded, and allowed the patents for the COVID vaccines to be waived.
Well, let me put it a different way. So if I was a drug company, I wouldn't bother to introduce the drug. I would wait for a country to approach me, beg me to make the drug available, but I wouldn't go in at all. I would just stop doing it.
But then you run into issues around your patenting, because if you do not utilize a patent, you don't exercise a patent, you can lose the patent. By definition, you must exercise your patents. Patents are a gift by society to a company to utilize a monopoly position for a set amount of time. And if you do not utilize that, society can say, okay, you're not utilizing this patent.
That sort of mirrors the Bayh-Dole.
It absolutely, that was the whole point of marching rights under Bayh-Dole.
Right. Yeah, that's a mistake.
Let's get it changed.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of nuances, and as you suggest, a lot of it is just up to legal arguments that would be made and how the judge would feel about it. So it's rather capricious. It's actually frightening because I think that intellectual property rights should take precedent.
100%.
And I think that this potentially undermines the whole idea of intellectual property rights.
And we're running into a very scary situation here where we're regulating things that are extremely complex, and people are doing so without the full understanding of the implications of what they're passing.
Yeah, I agree. A lot of unintended consequences.
Yeah, we find out 2 years later.
Yeah.
We can predict this as a firm. We can go in and argue with the politicians. If you do this, if you do X, we will see Y. The truth comes out eventually, but it's 24 months later.
Right.
We released this big study at Bio in Boston, and then 4 months later is JP Morgan. And all of the CEOs are going on stage basically saying, oh, no, we see no problem with Pharma IRA. And then everyone's coming back to us saying, hey, they're saying there's no problem. I'm like, they're lying. They are lying. You said something really interesting before about the Medicare Advantage versus regular Part D and some of these structures, and why you think that Medicare Advantage for you when you're managing a hospital or managing a facility where you need to actually rely on this for your money, you prefer the straight Medicare. I'd like to dig into that a little bit more. Why is that?
So all of the health records and everything, their systems, their payment systems, they're all already set for traditional Medicare. So it's super easy for anybody that's working in that particular chair, right? So if you get in Medicare Advantage, you have to go through the prior authorization. You have to get the portal. You have to bill it that way. And then you have to wait. And then they say yes or no, right? And then you bill it again. And then months later, they'll do a post-payment audit review.
So even
then they take money back.
So even if you get the drug, then you have to go through a rigmarole on the back end.
Yes, and for a lot of it, they'll say, "Oh no, we're going to go down a tier. Oh, we found out we're not going to actually cover that anymore." And then they'll just take the money back from the next patient
No
that
kidding.
comes in.
And is this pretty normal?
Yes.
No kidding.
It is an amazing amount of administrative work to take people in that have Medicare Advantage plans or commercial plans. Medicaid is the next one that you know for sure is going to pay. And that's even a lower rate than traditional Medicare.
If facilities don't like or prefer straight Medicare and that kind of stuff, what sort of additional burden or cost do these facilities impose on patients when they come in and you say, oh, they've got Medicare Advantage versus Medicare?
It's a delay in accepting referrals.
Hmm.
So,
Because they don't pay as much.
well, and you wait. If you're a standalone, you have more autonomy. You don't have to take all the patients that come from XYZ hospital. You can say, I'm going to wait an hour. Let's see if a traditional Medicare patient with a hip replacement comes in. So it's a wait game. It really is. You can say, I have 2 hours to decide if I'm going to take this referral or not. Let's see if X hospital will send somebody with an easy referral.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I'm thinking water seeks its own level. So,
Yeah, of course.
So a lot of people go into Medicare Advantage plans because to them they look cheaper. But there's another cost that they bear in getting service, is what you're suggesting. Is
Yes.
that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Interesting. I wonder if people know that.
You found out with the prior authorization for medication, right?
Yeah,
it's a mess.
That's straight D.
That's part D.
Part D.
That was part D.
Well, you don't have an advantage.
No.
Okay.
No.
In many ways, Gwen.
You
In
told
many
me
ways.
not to.
I know. No, you're right. It would be even worse.
Yeah.
It would be even worse.
Yeah, I can imagine.
One of the things that Harry, you and I did when we were crunching some data, picking up on what Gwen's talking about Medicare Advantage. With IRA, we saw some serious downside premium risk here. There's been a lot of spare revenue sloshing around, and with the benefit redesign combined with these lower revenue marks, you and I were, again, pretty early on the game saying, hey, there's going to be some premium implications here, and we're going to see a lot of upward pressure on premiums.
And the chickens are coming home to roost. I mean, now with Trump's thing and the whole idea that the government pays these insurance companies all this money and wants to pull that back, a lot of that has been holding premiums down. I was a bit surprised by the premiums because I just went into Medicare this year. I easily see these things doubling within a couple of years.
Yeah,
I really do.
They're going up to 15-20% per year right now. And what's happening is you're seeing an enormous exodus away from Medicare Advantage. A lot of companies are starting to pull out, as we saw with ACA, the Affordable Care Act.
Right.
We're seeing a lot of people withdrawing. What do you think are some of the fixes for this? I mean, you both have dealt with this on different sides now. Is it transparency? I mean,
that would have been my word. Yeah, transparency. I think any efforts to create transparency in the value chain of how drugs are delivered, negotiated, rebated, et cetera, would be highly useful because at least we could see what's going on. Then judgments could be made as to what that represents.
So, Gwen, one of the problems you mentioned, independent groups. So you have an independent hospital. There's fewer and fewer of those.
Correct.
There's a ton of consolidation. Mm-hmm. Why do you think that is? What was the pressure for that?
The vertical integration is all to glean off of what I think is 340B, to go off of transparency. 340B is a program that on its surface feels great. It is giving lower drug prices to areas that have poverty or like deserts for care. And then what happened was these bigger companies and hospitals started taking and saying, oh, they get this deal. Let's buy it. And then we get the deal. And then they just vertically integrate.
So these rural hospitals are being bought up by larger city hospitals in order to take advantage of the 340B?
Yes.
Yeah, the largest 340B hospital allegedly.
Because you're as a hospital gets designated as a 340B hospital.
Yes.
Yes.
And generally these are going to be rural
or very poor.
In
or
inner city. The largest one's in inner city. The largest 340B hospital is Central Atlanta. That's the largest 340B hospital.
But yes, rural and where there's areas that aren't a lot of options for care.
We've had an off-the-record conversation with someone about 340B, and they'd lost an enormous amount of NIH funding. They were saying we're going to have to make this up probably with 340B. This is actually going on. We've been told this sort of through secondary sources. That would be in the know, but trying to prove it, again, we go back to the big T word, transparency. There is none.
I think there's another one called Apexis that is, it's a third party that runs it, that people that are, or the hospitals and whatever, they can sign up to be in it, and then they get even lower prices, and it's then proprietary, so you can't have any access to the data. You can't see anything.
They're a private company that actually pushes 340B policy, and they block negotiate.
And the 340B is a kind of mandatory thing, right? So that if a drug company wants to sell a drug,
Yes.
then they have to adhere to the 340B terms if they want to sell a drug anywhere.
Well, because they're in Medicare. Yeah, because
Yeah.
they're under CMS.
Okay.
So any drug that's offered under CMS, you have to have a certain percentage.
Some Medicaid.
Medicaid
Right.
has to be
Yeah.
in 340B.
Yeah. Okay.
It's becoming a big problem because it's becoming a larger and larger share of the volume and the value chain.
Yeah.
So it's becoming this monster that's gobbling up revenue. There appears to be this belief that the pharmaceutical industry is just a magic money printing machine that is infinitely profitable, you know.
Yeah.
And what we know from the work we've been doing, that the industry is about 13-14% net margin.
Yeah, really, they're not that profitable, really.
Yeah, 3 years ago during COVID, their net profitability was slightly less than the shoe sector, if I'm not mistaken. And tobacco, I think, the fact is, it's not as powerful. Like financial services, about 30% net margin. IT, software as a service is about 30%. 13-14% is not
great.
Not great. We've just discussed our MFN study. We're also working on a retrospective analysis, going back and looking at what's happened before and after IRA in actual clinical trial data and clinical trials that have been run. Let's put some meat on the bone. Harry, we just have this study. We just talked to the client. We can give some top-line results. What did we see here when we looked at the impact across all clinical studies for 4 years before and 4 years after the Inflation
Yeah,
Reduction
I think
Act?
that was 2018 or 19 through
2018 through
2025.
2025, yeah.
We looked at about 20 aggregated categories of indications, but we had the very detailed data on indications. And we looked at what happened before and after IRA. And we looked both at the absolute number of clinical trials taking place for secondary indications, whether they were suspended or not, or they would, however they did. We were just looking for effort. Where are companies pursuing secondary trials in what areas? We really found primarily two categories that seem to have been affected, at least statistically, and that was, surprise, surprise, oncology and also in hematology, and they're somewhat related. We then looked at designations as to whether or not the secondary indications were targeting rare disease or not, and whether they tended to be small molecule or large molecule or so-called biologics. And what we found was a huge reduction in small molecules in oncology, and we saw a reduction also in rare disease targeting, or so-called orphan indications. There's some rumblings around that maybe they would like to repeal the Orphans Cure Act, and given what we saw in the context of oncology, we would think that that would be a mistake because we already see it going down.
What was interesting is we wanted to target secondary studies. And the general feeling was, well, by the time you brought it to 2B, you're going to bring it to market, and you're probably not going to see a big change in lead indications. And in fact, we saw a 27% drop.
Yeah, that was really surprising.
And again, a statistically significant result.
Right, and it was surprising because, as you said, we weren't really focused on the lead indications, but in the end, we also analyzed that, and that was a shocker.
And then, of course, small molecule oncology gets filleted, 35% drop, a third.
Yeah.
Gwen, you did a lot of work looking at those suspended studies. Did you see any patterns in the suspended studies? I mean, where were you seeing most of them?
Phase 2.
Yeah. And oncology.
Yes.
Yeah. The song remains the same,
Yeah.
A great Led Zeppelin record, but a bad policy. So we're killing, in many ways, the patients who are most in need. It's the ones who need access to late-stage treatments in cancer that are failing.
Right.
And we're basically removing the ability for companies to go after and target those areas of high unmet medical need. What is going to happen, do you think, both of you, politically? Anything? If it comes out that we've lost a third of cancer trials?
It's really kind of a shock. And what's interesting is that it's not really a huge time frame, right, in which to analyze that, and yet to see these significant drops, particularly in small and also in the
orphan drugs.
Orphan drug.
Yeah.
That does not bode well for these policies. And this just reminds me so much of Europe. What they're doing is they're going in and interfering with the markets.
Yeah.
So they're setting quasi-price controls. These are generally understood to be the exact wrong policies to pursue in this case, because fundamentally it's about an income redistribution issue. And I know that I get pushback when I say this, but you know, if you wanted to tax the drug companies some of their revenues and use that to subsidize people that need these drugs, you know, that is a more economically efficient way of bringing about the desired allocation of resources. Of course, it's not music to the ears of drug companies, but if public policy is such that they want to try to support this, the wrong thing is interfering at the margin in markets through price controls, et cetera, et cetera.
Gwen, you live in Wisconsin, quite rural, long way away from D.C.
Yes.
What's the public opinion on these drug pricing bills? Are they popular?
Yes, these are the drugs that they're taking, and these are going to be lower prices, and this is the way life is. And it's so complex. I think that it's hard to explain it all, and then you lose people right away. I think the one thing that I can say resonates is that innovation is leaving the United States. It is going elsewhere, and we have to rely on other areas of the world to then give us the new medications instead of keeping it here.
It's interesting because, Harry, you were very early on the China train. You know, you were like, do we see China? Do we see China? And I was like, well, we do, but it's not much.
Yeah.
And it's just really in the last 18 to 24 months, it's like, oh, yeah, we see China now. It's really been a full order of magnitude, 100 to 1,000 trials in about 4 years.
Yeah, amazing.
It's been an amazing jump.
And deals.
And tons of deals now, Gwen.
We saw that
on the study
3 years ago.
Yes, we started seeing these deals. And we start seeing Chinese companies that look like American companies. They wave an American flag, but then you open up the hood and you realize, oh my God, this is from Shanghai. This is from Guangdong. This is, you know, and you realize that the intellectual property and the foundation of the company was actually Chinese backing. And then it set up in a lot of it's in California. So, Harry, if we keep down this path, we're hearing that the 9 and 9 solution is starting to be floated again.
Yeah.
What happens?
Well, I lost one foot. I should cut the other one off so it's even. You know, I mean, it's ridiculous. It's really ridiculous. So you're referring to what we've been calling the pill penalty,
Yes.
and others call the pill penalty, and so reducing the time under patent from 13 to 9 years for large molecule. We also just did a study recently where we were looking at the
General pharmaceutical legislation
in Europe, and they have all these funny things where they're trying to basically eliminate intellectual property rights. I think it's the absolute wrong way to go. I'm not a fan of high prices. I mean, I don't like to pay a lot of money. I mean, like anybody else, I don't want to pay a lot of money. But, you know, something has to go in order to fund and back the research, as Gwen was mentioning. It's easy to criticize somebody once something's been invented and say, well, you shouldn't have any money for that, right? That's the way the system works, and we found it's actually the best system. That is to allow intellectual property protection for a period of time.
Yeah.
Shortening it is just going to make it less profitable, not only in the sense of profits and excess over costs, but just viability is going to reduce the viability of large molecules. And as we know, for large molecule drugs, they are much more expensive to produce. So when you're only giving them 9 years of patent protection, I think pretty much they're going to just throw up their hands and not do it.
Or you're just going to see people do an exodus away from anything that has exposure to government funding, and they're just going to focus.
Well,
on the
yeah,
private market.
that's the other thing is, you know, I mean, it's although I guess we could always take them over, right? And
No.
we have the same compulsory licensing issues, but all of this kind of points in some ways to thinking about, should government run a medical insurance program? And maybe it would be better to try to design a better private market system, open it up across state lines, et cetera, all the things that we can see. It's like the banking industry.
Yeah.
is
Oh, they've done
70
so
years
well
ago.
with education.
Yeah. Well, you know, it calls for, you know, some thinking, but I'm not sure we're going to get that here in the near future.
Gwen, you positive, negative? Where are you? Midland? What do you think's going to happen in the next 3 years?
Nothing's going to change for sure the next 2 years. So I think it's going to be all about lowering drug prices. Well, Europe, their drug prices are so much lower. Well, if you want to wait 3 years.
Yeah. Because, you have a 2-year delay, and we're seeing that now in the data that we're working on. We're seeing 2 years, 3 years now in certain markets.
Yeah, that's what I tell my wife all the time. And she talks about how drug prices are lower in Europe.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
you said, and I said, yeah, but you can't get the drug.
Yeah.
And when I lived in Europe and I had to deal with some issues like that, they had very old equipment.
Yeah.
No, they would like to have the new equipment, but no, they didn't have the new equipment.
Or they approve the drug in France, but not in Portugal. So you have to go from Portugal to France, and then you have to pay full market price. And so,
Right.
Yeah, or a lot of the Eastern EU countries don't have them at all. Romania, Lithuania.
It's like, I was like one of those squeezy dolls, where you
Yeah.
squeeze it and the eyes pop out, or the other parts. Yeah, that's what it is. It's just because it's going to pop out somewhere.
The political capital in the sector is complete. It seems to be completely gone. And it's the number one whipping boy now. It's sort of like the new tobacco. It's really quite scary because fundamentally, my father's being kept alive by a late-stage oncology product that had he not had access to it, he would not be potentially able to see his grandson graduate this year. I'm very concerned about this. Unfortunately, I don't know what the long-term solutions are. I guess all we can do is keep plugging away and say, okay, you broke it. Here it is. This scoreboard, 35% drop, folks.
Yes.
The reality is we do see a 35% drop.
You give it some time, and I think people who ordinarily would not think of secondary consequences will start to see those consequences. So if we're trying to pound on the door and say, look, this is having this effect, this is having this effect, this is having this effect, some people will start to feel that. I'm going to be a little bit optimistic. I see these sort of populist policies coming, but it is not the first thing. I mean, we've been fighting these kinds of populist policies, so to speak, for centuries. That's really what led to the development of economics as a science from political economy. So I'm optimistic in the sense that I think that we will have people who recognize that there are severe second and tertiary consequences of these policies, and we'll suffer a bit. I think that we will see the light. I think we will see the light in a few years, especially if companies really start to move as they're already moving in some ways, and it gets even bigger. I think people will blow the alarm because obviously the biopharmaceutical sector supports a large number of jobs in this country, generates billions of dollars of tax revenue, et cetera, et cetera. They're an important industry. And you just look at what's happening recently in Massachusetts with all of these vacancies and this kind of thing. And California, along with all of its other problems, is kind of in the toilet with regard to that aspect of things. So, I think that there are interests that will see it is in their interest to stem these losses. I just hope it can occur sooner rather than.
An optimistic note. Thank you, Harry.
Absolutely.
Our MFN preprint is available on our website for download. You can come and see it while we're undergoing the peer review process. Again, please feel free to download it. Pop us a question if you have anything. Happy to talk about it with you or whoever wants to ask us questions. Happy to fill you in. Gwen, a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Dr. Bowen, always a pleasure, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
The executive producer of the Vital Health Podcast is Duane Schulthess. Editing by Caden Drake. The Vital Health Podcast is a production of Vital Transformation, LLC, copyright 2026.